And welcome to the Filmstein Podcast, a podcast where we are challenged with trying to articulate a love for art and storytelling. Today I'm joined by my daylight-loving friend, Lucy.
Hello, everyone.
I'm glad everybody could join us today. Thank you very much for being here, because today we will be talking about Ari Aster's 2019 film, Midsommar. I'm very curious where this conversation takes us today. There's a lot I like about Midsommar. It's a really powerful introduction. Danny's sister kills herself and their parents. We also get this really neat depiction of a character, Christian, being kind of checked out and ready to break up and being on a different wavelength than someone like Danny, but finds himself in this, no doubt, strange social, contractual obligation to stick with it for Danny for the sake of some kind of dependency in a time of need and grief. And of course, we quickly find ourselves in Sweden, and then the film really starts to unpack itself in a really neat way. It's set up in a very explicit way, but we have this parallel of pain with the grief of losing a loved one and the process of breaking up with someone. Of course, we also get this wonderful depiction of foreigners not understanding different cultures, therefore, of course, not being able to respect it in one way or another, no matter how strange it is. Of course, maybe a little bit more explicitly, we get a funny reflection of what different cultures, different ideologies can come across, like atheists observing Christians or Muslims, or Americans observing Chinese or Indians. But of course, what really shines in this film is Ari Aster's depiction of the process, the intermingled stages of grief, and how they ping-pong between the different stages, and the necessity of communal healing, people being there with you, and that breaking of the tension that builds over those days, weeks, and months after that painful experience, just allowing you to breathe again. In that way, Midsommar seems to be one of the ultimate breakup films, paralleling the extremity of what grief can be and the grief of breaking up with someone. Of course, they are and are not on the same level, so it is genius to see those next to each other. But I'm very curious, man, how did you feel about Midsommar?
What a movie. It left me feeling some sort of way. I'll start out by saying that I can appreciate the beauty and care and love and fun that Ari and team put in this film. I appreciate it thematically, and I appreciate this outlook into Danny's relationship. But it just felt too long, too drawn out, which was my problem the first time I watched this film. But I guess now rewatching it, I now realize that what I thought was bad pacing was actually the dread and the exhaustion that Danny feels, and that Ari in turn is making us feel. I felt exhausted watching this movie, and honestly, in the middle of the night, for some strange reason, I kept creeping myself out. So it's a very weird feeling exhausted from this drawn out movie, but at the same time paying too much attention that I was a bit too immersed, that I then creep myself out. The trickiest part for me to navigate around was the ceremony and festival aspect of the film, because the movie spends about 45 minutes before we see the ritual with the two elders. And while that setup was honestly great, and the rituals were cool, the rituals themselves were a little too long. I don't really know how to describe it. Like, the scene taking place would linger and had a real-time pacing. We would actually watch them sit down look around, look at each other, take a bite, take a sip. I found those scenes to be overwhelming and a little bit meandering. I felt like I spent the entire 4 days, or however long it was, with them. I lived the festival with them. There's so much happening in this movie, symbolically, thematically, and with all its great motifs, that I wouldn't be surprised if I didn't see it all, if I didn't catch it all. I think Ari is a guru at making these themes flow naturally. Like you said, that parallel between the pain of losing a loved one to the pain of losing a loved one just flowed so naturally. And I honestly couldn't believe the foreshadowing and the detail that went into the story here. There was also this jarring contrast or pairing, I'm not sure how to really describe it, between the folklore with modernity. The film literally showing us a folklore tradition paired with a breakup. And I like that. It really takes you out. The movie is, and I believe you might be in agreement with me from what you said, first and foremost, a movie about a breakup, a failed, toxic relationship. Christian clearly doesn't want to be with Danny and acts like a coward. He can't let her go because she's clingy. And she clings to him more, rightfully so, after her family is tragically killed in the murder-suicide. And she needs support. And her only support is Christian, whether she wants it or not. But then creepily finds a new support system. Danny is vulnerable and it clouds her entire judgment. It's so melodramatic how these two can't leave each other. I like it. And I really think you and I are on the same page in a lot of ways. But you might be a bit more positive, whereas I'm a little bit more creeped out. This movie gave me some conspiracy and paranoia. I questioned so much, like the death of her family. Was that on purpose? When Pele says that he was an orphan too, and how the community saved him, it seemed a bit planned. The choice of all the outsiders, like Christian, Josh, the Brits, and Mark, didn't feel random. They each represented something, right? And I mean, no wonder I'm on edge watching this movie, because we literally see moving flowers and faces in mirrors, but the majority of the film is spent in bright daylight. And that's just not what you do, right? To psych someone out, to make someone feel scared or uncomfortable, you put them in darkness. Evil and horror hide in darkness. And what this film does is removes that darkness to make your brain feel safe, when in reality you're not safe here. Then you start feeling exposed. And then this film starts getting all kinds of disturbing. I like what you said about foreigners not understanding different cultures, and therefore maybe not respecting the idiosyncrasies. And I kind of took this as, this is why you don't travel to these authentic, isolated communities, right? I've seen too many movies now that I feel like people deserve their fate when they try to insert themselves into cultures they don't respect and don't understand. This group of people don't approach this with humility, and they just want something out of this experience for themselves. Or worse, like Mark, they don't care. And I like that this kind of ties in with that mild B plot with Christian and Josh and this thesis debacle, which I love, by the way. I love that jealousy and how this starts to turn into some sort of exploitation and just gets filled with all this negativity. And yeah, Danny seems to be one of the exceptions here. She's a bit more passive and receptive, probably because she needs it. And it just kind of made me feel like karma got them. At least the ones who got. The ending, when Danny looks into the camera and her frown turns upside down, it leaves you thinking, is she happy, or is this something more cathartic? And is this cathartic feeling the same as a happy ending?
Yeah, you make a lot of really interesting points. It's kind of like in Parasite, where if you're poor, you better stay poor. Don't try to pretend like you're rich. Bad things will happen. Yeah, it's kind of funny. I took this film as an extraordinarily positive movie, at least in its sticking point, its landing point. It's almost exactly equal in its kind of dueling grief narrative, where we start with the death of her family. She's grieving, obviously, and that grief kind of morphs into the grief of the setup for a breakup, because the hardest part of a breakup is doing the breakup, not after the breakup. Sort of the inverse of losing a loved one. You're not sad about losing a loved one if they're not lost yet. So it's strangely kind of a perfect narrative structure in that way. And I like what you have to say about it being very melodramatic, because it is. To be fair, these aren't real characters, kind of to your point of being able to trust Danny on some level, accepting that she's happy at the end when she smiles. It's not really that important because it's so messagey and symbolic. But at the same time, their relationship was very high school feeling, not very real, not very deep, not very personable, not very meaningful. It didn't seem like Christian's friends really knew Danny. And of course, Danny is probably the most unreliable character because of what she's dealing with, obviously. So it does come across very melodramatic, like you could have just ended this months and months before Danny's sister killed herself. I'm sure things were not great then either.
Yeah, I love the line when she tells Pele or somebody that she forgot to remind him about her birthday. So it was no big deal that he forgot. Like, how dramatic is that? But then it also tells us a lot about Danny's character.
And I really feel you on this point of excess with what we see on camera, how much time we spend in each sequence of the ritual or points of dialogue. It's a dangerous space, just like we've talked about many times with slice of life films. I tend to like them a lot when they land, and I think they land pretty well here. It reminded me of Wolf of Wall Street, where there's just this perversion of spending so much time doing X, Y, and Z. And in this case, it feels like we're putting each and every moment kind of under a microscope to reflect the out-of-body experience that Danny's going through. And of course, if you're not immersed, it might bore you. Because how many times do we see them do the same table actions, right? How much time do we spend seeing characters that we don't care about do and say nothing? Of course, we all know when grief strikes, it's kind of like when you're sick, you start to forget what feeling good felt like. You start to wonder if you're ever going to feel better, and time starts to stagnate. It also kind of emphasizes the importance of great performances. So thank God Florence Pugh does a wonderful job. And I like your point about folklore and tradition, because it starts to identify that grief in all of its forms are as old as time and are a part of all cultures and traditions. And I almost forgot the pretty explicit use of foreshadowing and setup is really cool, because it starts to suggest or identify that you can theoretically, logically kind of know the process of what grief might be like, maybe having been there before, but you'll never be able to process it in some kind of systematic, clinical kind of way. It kind of ties into every moment being put under a microscope. When you're going through something like that, you start to form some distorted reality, which definitely plays into the use of some sort of hallucinogenics in this film. I guess it's like a mushroom tea.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I kind of took it as when you read a textbook or you take a psychology class, everyone majors in psychology these days. So you know what this illness entails because you read about it. You know what grief entails because you have the processes right here in this textbook, like the tapestry that shows us, these tidbits of what is going to happen. But you never know what you're going to get when you are actually experiencing these things. And no one in their right mind at that moment is going to think, oh, I read on page 65 that I'm going to experience some anger, so let me experience
I'm
some
in the anger stage of my grief. It's kind of romantic, actually, this film, in different ways.
Nothing in this film is romantic.
It feels like Ari's expose of this is going to be painful and not clinical like you've learned about, but it's going to be beautiful.
I'm very curious what your thoughts are on this conspiracy that I'm forming here with Danny being the ultimate goal for this community to be their flower girl or queen flower or whatever. The pivotal point here is to get Danny to come to this trip. Did her family die on purpose? Christian didn't want to bring Danny on this trip, but she came. She's there. Did someone, like Pele, whisper it in Christian's ear like he whispered in Danny's ear to just accept this? Because when he was an orphan, this community saved him. So if she accepts this, this community is going to save her. That right there is what kept me from being positive. Or am I just being paranoid?
No, I don't think you're off base with this paranoia and conspiratorial kind of vibe. I think it is especially prevalent from the perspective of being not very religious. These rules, these truths, the necessity of faith and tradition. It starts to paint this picture, I think, what non-religious folks observe in religious organizations. When a non-believer is listening to a man of God, things often feel convenient, predestined, dogmatic. There is this essence of predeterminism and destiny with someone like Danny, like she's the chosen one, she's a Messiah type character. Because as a non-believer, when I hear the children of God say what the man has to say, when they preach their guidelines, it's disturbing in the same way that when we hear the elders speak that when they turn 75 or whatever, they must return to the earth.
One of the ties to Hereditary that I thought about was these women, or women in general, carrying the story through their anguish, and the men sort of feeling like sacrifices and making it hard to relate, especially in Midsommar, how hard it was to relate to the male figures. And basically they were used for narrative purposes. Because I don't think he's trying to say anything against men or trying to put women's emotions in a bad light. I just think there's some appreciation there on how hard, or maybe how real or raw, women experience emotions.
Yeah, Ari Aster obviously has a fascination with affected women, the effects of women, with Hereditary, Midsommar, and Beau's Afraid. Beau's mom, let us not forget. One thing I really love about Midsommar and Danny is how singular it is. We set the stage up so wonderfully in almost a extraordinarily natural light with Christian and his friends. And just when that loses its momentum of them just kind of going to Sweden to hang out with Pele, we set this feud up between Josh, and Christian. And the rest writes itself. They're bickering, privileged PhD students, right?
Yeah.
And I love your point of them, to some degree, of course, exploiting these traditions, this culture. And what's ironic about that kind of exploitation is there's no one better than a foreigner to observe a foreign culture, to have some kind of objection, to be the kind of lived control. But like I was saying earlier, we don't get a lot of character out of the side characters, and Danny too, but we do get the anxiety and dread and weight and sadness out of Danny, which is the important parts.
Yep.
And even maybe half the time, maybe more, through other characters, we receive more of that weight that Danny's experiencing. When Christian is taking his part in the ceremony,
That's a nice way to phrase it.
our mind is exclusively with Danny's in those moments.
Yeah, that's a really great point. There's something to say there about how restrained Ari had to be, not only narrative-wise, but, with his characters, because I would have loved to get more on this rivalry between Christian and Josh, but there was restraint. We don't need to know more about these characters. This isn't a world Ari is trying to build here.
Yeah, funny enough, that restraint really flexed itself specifically between Josh and Christian, because that was much more interesting than Christian and Danny, which is the more obvious thing to kind of unpack just a little bit to give us some heartache or just tension between the two characters, but Ari masterfully rejected any kind of dynamism kind of revealing itself between the two and just focusing on the pain of Danny.
Yeah, because I don't know about you, but that struck a chord with me. I was so mad with the Josh. Like, man, are you kidding me? Christian, you barely wanted to come. You dragged your girlfriend that the group clearly doesn't like. I'm over here, experiencing this and asking all the right questions, and then you're trying to steal my idea. But then it's funny that he ruins it for himself by trying to sneak pictures of what he shouldn't be taking pictures of, and just the greed getting the best of him. And yeah, very well crafted to get a response like that from your audience and reeling it back in and saying, hey, that's not what we're here. This character's just, as bad as the others.
Yeah, and what a great example of first world, ultra privileged melodrama.
Yup.
Right, man. Well, thank you very much for watching Midsommar and talking about it here today.
You're welcome.
Do you have a budget guess?
Well, following Hereditary with a 10 million budget, this can only be more, right? Longer movie. Don't know if more is happening here, but we definitely have some parts in the States and then some parts in Sweden, different parts in a different location, wherever this folk festival takes place. We have more people. I'm going to double that budget to 20 million.
No, that's fair. Movies inflate. Money laundering, embezzlement, what have you. Well, it says here the budget was 9 million, actually.
Oh, wow.
And this is why I think Ari Aster is going on to produce films, because he is a budget master.
He's a budget master.
The film went on to make $48.5 million, so it did just all right for itself.
Did it have a wide release?
I think so, because it was released in the US and Canada. And over on Letterboxd with 4.16 million people. That's a lot of people. They weighed in at a 3.8. Very high.
I think I'm going to go with a 3 for this movie. Don't know if it'll change. Don't know if rewatching this movie will make it change. But I honestly am too exhausted to rewatch this movie anytime soon. I was so relieved at the end that it was over. Again, I need to wrap my mind around that is the intent of the movie, to leave me as drained as Danny is, and then leave me cathartic when this movie is over. But I definitely felt it. I love a lot of the parallels. I love a lot of the foreshadowing. Even some of the minor foreshadowing that if you catch it, you catch it. If you don't, it's no big deal. For example, at the beginning of the film, when Christian is out drinking with his buddies and they're talking about the trip, and he says, well, maybe you'll impregnate a Swedish girl on the trip, and they all laugh. And then later in the movie, where's Christian? Impregnating a girl. And it's just funny. Then, of course, you have your bigger foreshadowing moments. And they're great. They're all great. I do think we had similar thoughts on the film. And there were points where I would have loved to be positive towards this film. And maybe take that angle that you did with this communal healing. Especially in bits and pieces. I'm thinking of the times when Danny saw Christian doing what he was doing, and she started wailing on the ground, and then the women got down with her and started wailing too, and she was kind of like, what the crap? But then they all, experienced that feeling together. That was nice in that moment. But, I was left too creeped out in other moments that I don't know if I'm fully there on seeing this as a whole positive experience. And I'm still with my conspiracies that this was all planned. So I think there was more good than bad for me.
Well, that's good to hear. I just kind of thought, to your point about these conspiracy and predetermined outcomes, maybe it's Ari Aster's way of telling Danny in some way that it's going to be okay. By the end of this, you're going to be okay. I love this film's use of genre subversion. In a way, life subversion. And maybe it's just me, but that duality of positive notes, that when you lose a loved one, you will find peace again, and the reciprocal of you will find the power to end that relationship. There is something strangely positive about that, wrapped up in Midsommar and kind of tricking you with the nearly 24 hours of light, where it starts to take this surrealistic, horrifying angle out of something that is like the May Queen and the Midsommar Festival, normally beautiful and fun, right? This film kind of reminded me of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. It's a little quieter here in what is put under the microscope. In Fear and Loathing, it's narrated to us, of course. Midsommar's an extraordinarily tight film. And I think it's definitely a solid 3.5. But yeah, man, thank you again for talking about this film here today. And thank you guys for listening to this episode of The Filmistines. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Remember, we post weekly on all the free feeds: YouTube, Apple Podcast, Spotify, Patreon. Remember to leave nice comments, thoughts, and ideas on our Patreon as well. Come subscribe, come right in, come request a film. Our next film will be on the new Ari Aster film, Eddington. So please look forward to that. We appreciate all the support. Thank you guys very much. But until next time, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of The Filmistines. Thanks for tuning in and joining us on our cinematic journey. We hope you enjoyed the discussion and gained some new insights and perspectives on the world of movies. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform, especially Patreon, patreon.com/filmistines. And follow us on social media for more film-related content. We love hearing from our listeners, so if you have any feedback, suggestions, movie recommendations, or book recommendations, please feel free to reach out to us. Until next time, keep watching and keep loving the magic of movies. This is The Filmistines, signing off.